my name is Tara. Could you please start by introducing yourself and what you do?
Sure. I'm Cyntha Miller-Idriss. I'm a professor at the American University in Washington, D.C., in the School of Public Affairs and in the School of Education. I'm a sociologist by training, and I'm the founding director of what's called the Polarization and Extremism Research and Innovation Lab, also known as PERIL, which designs and tests tools to help communities be better equipped against harmful online content.
Mm-hmm. So in Hate of the Homeland, you discuss how extremist groups use aspects of youth culture to attract young people. What specific methods are they using to appeal to this demographic, and what challenges do we face in countering these tactics?
Yeah, I think the biggest shift over the last 10 or 15 years has been the weaponization of youth culture in terms of the use of humor and satire and irony and jokes, including memes by the far right, to soften hateful ideas and to also position them as just a joke. So there's always like plausible deniability or dual meanings, or it can be just like you're just a triggered snowflake who's woke and over, exaggerating and not not really able to take the joke. And I think that's one. It's problematic because it's made it fun for a lot of young people to kind of engage in what are otherwise hateful and dehumanizing ideas. And it desensitizes and it kind of normalizes and helps channel that content into something that doesn't seem as offensive. So you'll have like Holocaust denial memes or minimization memes that make fun of the Holocaust using pizza oven iconography, and then you see teenagers like saying the same things when they're this happened with a journalist telling me that his son, he overheard putting a pizza in the oven and saying the thing I'm not going to say, which came from a meme. And his son's like, "Oh, Dad, it's a meme. Everybody says it, but it's like super offensive, anti-Semitic thing to say." And he just didn't see it anymore because he couldn't. It just was like something that he'd come across so often as a meme. So I think the countering of that, the preventing of that, is really hard because prevention tends to be like more serious and more like earnest, right? Less driven with humor and satire and irony and jokes. And so I think one of the things we do need to do is try to figure out like can you get a little bit into that game too? Can you use comedy? Can you use humor? Can you be funnier and in your prevention approaches? And so far, prevention approaches have not managed to do that. It just it ends up being corny or just cringy, as kids will say, right? It's just like it hasn't worked. Yeah.
So sticking to the book, you've mentioned that there's no exact definition of the generally used term far right, as it covers both those who operate under government control and those who don't. So would you say that there is a relative need for political influence to spread the ideals of the far right, or do you think social media is effective enough for the propaganda to spread through just to regular individuals?
I think the fact that it's happened on both sides, like basically in the youth-driven subcultures and over social media, and also we've seen the same ideas be espoused by mainstream politicians, elected officials, and political candidates who, just really extreme things like anti-immigrant or, Trump referring to Mexicans as rapists. I'm not talking about just like conservative politics, but like offensive and extreme kind of things to say. That has hurt, right? So the fact that you have elected officials or mainstream politicians who are supporting QAnon, for example, can make it seem more legitimate. And so what might otherwise seem like just something that is circulating online then gets echoed in, on Fox News when somebody says the Great Replacement kind of conspiracy theory is true and there is a plot to replace white voters with immigrants or something like that, kind of reinforces and echoes. So I would say it's problematic that both things are happening at the same time.
You've advocated for the role of educational programs in combating extremist ideologies. Could you share specific examples of successful programs that you've studied or helped develop, and what specifically makes them effective?
Yeah. So we have a bunch of different types of programming. So one, we have a whole digital lab that does video-based interventions, and those have statistically significant results. We create videos that teach people about manipulative tactics. They're called pre-bunking, and it's a pretty scripted thing. You warn people about the fact that there's bad actors out there trying to manipulate you. You give them an example of the propaganda that's called a microdose, and then you kind of tell them to go forth and be skeptical, essentially, like all in about 30 seconds. And when you do that, the evidence shows that people reject the propaganda along with the manipulative tactics. So it reduces the persuasion of the propaganda because they get more skeptical of it. So we've got evidence. We do that with comparison group testing, it's called. So you show a control group a different type of video, and then you ask, so you get enough people that it's statistically valid. So we do videos that are the same length of time, and it's either somebody watching how to build a birdhouse or how to fold a paper airplane video, and then you ask that group the same set of questions as the group that watched your treatment video, it's called. That's the method. And we found that it worked on every type of propaganda across about a dozen different types of studies over the years, different lengths, except on male supremacist propaganda. It didn't work. And so that was stickier. And so we've gone back to the drawing board on that and are taking a different approach. On the other side of the lab, which is mostly my side, we do community-based work with parents, teachers, mental health counselors, coaches, faith leaders, to help equip them with tools to recognize warning signs of exposure among their loved ones, especially teenagers, and then feel more confident that they can intervene and know how to do it effectively. And so there we do pre and post testing. So we have them take a set of questions, and then we do the intervention. Usually they read a guide that we've created, and then we test afterward to see how much they learned and did it improve their confidence and their willingness. And in some cases, we study them in a longitudinal way. So we've done that with parents now, 1,500 parents we've been studying for a year at every 3 months to see how long do they remember what they learned, did they use it, did they intervene with a person in their life who they now recognize. So, a lot of what we do is try to provide evidence back to the field on what you can do. I would say some of our most successful, depends on how you define success, like we have statistically significant results on everything we've done, but they've had different impacts in different ways, except for the male supremacist one that didn't work. For example, we find that within 3 months, 6% of the parents that we work with use what they learned to intervene with a young person who they now understand is exposed to radicalizing content. 11% of them have, within 3 months, either created or joined a group of other parents to talk about the online harms that their kids are exposed to. And so we also think that's important, right? We find that when we run the videos at scale, so we've put them on YouTube as pre-roll ads, we get, we've gotten about a 7% what you call lift, a shift in people's willingness to reject the propaganda, for example. So that's a smaller outcome, but when you have 2.3 million people, it's still a lot.
Okay. So your research highlights how globalization can fuel extremist sentiments by challenging national identity. How have you observed this dynamic playing out in different countries, and what interventions seem most promising?
Yeah, I think, so the issue of globalization plays out in a couple of different ways. One, you have, it's not consistent. So you have anti-globalization aspects of it. So you have kind of far-right groups and far-left groups who are kind of calling for, either the breakdown of capitalism or kind of restoration of some simpler, purer, utopian ideal that existed before globalization. And so that includes the idea that you'd create a white ethno-state, for example, and that you would, want a phoenix-like rise from the ashes, the death of this current civilization, and then the separation of the races. That's a very common white supremacist kind of thing that's kind of anti-global, anti-multiculturalism. So we see that kind of thing. And we also see that globalization, I guess, as reflected in the circulation of ideas online, has certainly allowed for terrorist actors to communicate and learn from each other and then try to imitate each other and also try to one-up each other. And so that's where the live streaming comes in. They try to demonstrate their sort of street creds with each other in an online community of terrorists, which just sounds terrible, but it is the way that it plays out. In terms of like the interventions that are most effective, in general, prevention is divided into 3 types of interventions. It's called primary, secondary, or tertiary. Tertiary is de-radicalization, so where you're trying to get somebody to disengage, to not be violent, and to give up their ideology, ideally. Secondary prevention is what the US usually does, which is try to prevent a radicalized person from taking violent action. And so that's the like, if you see say something campaign, and teaching synagogues to lock the doors before services, like so that you could prevent a possible harm with a security-based approach. Mm-hmm. And then primary prevention is what we call for, which is preventing people from becoming radicalized to begin with. And so the best evidence is in the primary side, because that's the easiest to lift, but it's the most scalable, it's easy to do, you actually can relatively quickly get people to not be persuaded by bad content online. You can teach them how to be skeptical, not just of ideology content online, but also like sextortion scams or IRS scams, like just teach them to be safer online from harmful actors. It's not that hard to do, but what's hard to do is get the investments in it from the government, who don't see it as part of their job in the US in a security approach, where the money really goes into the law enforcement side in the middle. The least effective, the hardest to scale, is the de-radicalization, where it's like therapeutic, it's one-on-one, it's not scalable. You can de-radicalize people, but it's very hard to prove that they're de-radicalized. There have been several cases in the UK where they have prison de-radicalization programs where they say someone is de-radicalized, but then they've gone on to commit another terrorist act. So I am very wary of anybody who says they're running a de-radicalization program. It's like, could help, it might not. And then I think this idea of certifying people as de-radicalized is risky. And it's expensive. Yeah.
So in your book, you mentioned, you referred to the term far right as a kind of best bad term, I believe, is what you said. But would you say to commit some of these activities, you would need a certain amount of political influence, or do you think any?
Yeah, I think